Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the Amber Valley series. There are 35 parishes in this beautiful slice of eastern Derbyshire. Here's one for your viewing pleasure. Welcome back, folks, to a rainy Derbyshire and to Amber Valley for the first time this year. The last time we saw this district was 2023, wasn't it? We've done a run of Derbyshire Dales ones since then. This is a very interesting village. I'm just going to move forward a little bit here because there's a lorry coming down this very narrow road. And this narrow road is where the main village is. The building you can see there in shot is actually the parish room. You wouldn't know that this even existed if you just sort of drove past on the main road, because this really isn't the main road. This is the village street that's in the middle of nowhere. Plenty to see in this place though, so let's get to it. Welcome to the parish of Shipley. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like, and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Shipley, sheep clearing. Amber Valley returns to your screens with a village that sits between the town of Heanor and its near neighbour Ilkeston, over the border in Erewash. That village would be Shipley. It's often considered to be something of a southern extension of Heanor, but trust me, Shipley has its own identity, and how. Like so many other villages in this part of Derbyshire, coal mining was the main economic activity. The pits were owned by the Miller-Mundy family, who owned and occupied the once grand mansion Shipley Hall, which has now been reduced to just its former footprint. It's still very much visitable though, as is the enormous Shipley Country Park, created after mining ceased. Somewhat ironically, it was coal mining that would ultimately be the Hall's downfall. Remnants of the former pits still stand, and nowadays the colliery land has been redeveloped into housing. In the intervening period though, Shipley became popular for another reason. Between 1985 and 2007, thousands of thrill seekers looking for a white knuckle ride descended upon this part of Derbyshire. To the untrained eye, Shipley would just be one of those places you pass through to get to somewhere else, but it's well worthy of a walk around. So let's get the boots on and go and do just that. We start in what's probably an area not many people know. This is the Field, a narrow track with speed bumps off the A6007 between Heanor and Ilkeston. Despite most of Shipley being located along that road, this area is considered to be the village centre. The parish room, built in 1897, began life as an ambulance station for the local coal mines originally. It's now the main communal venue in Shipley, and it's operated by a team of volunteers. This is also where the parish notice board is, so naturally here, that job can be gotten out of the way too. Over the road, hiding behind some tall trees, is an abandoned building. This is Michael House School, or was, until it was forced to close thanks to financial issues. Now boarded up and dangerous to enter, among its famous former pupils is the actor William Roach, the much-loved Ken Barlow in Coronation Street. Shipley has no school these days. In fact, in terms of facilities, it doesn't have a great deal, aside from the parish room. The village centre is a collection of peaceful cottages, all of which once belonged to the Shipley estate. There is a central village green though, which features a phone box housing a defib machine and a post box in a wall. The central part of Shipley lies on a dead-end road these days. That wasn't always the case. Until the road from Mapley was closed by the county council, it was connected to its near neighbour on the other side of Shipley Country Park. Luckily for us though, access to the park is still very much possible. There are no end of footpaths, byways and bridleways you can use to get to it, and the site of Shipley Hall, which this sign points you towards. The way I chose to go was via the old road to Mapley. This runs parallel to a cycle path which follows the route of an old railway line. Of course, this was a mining area, so old railway infrastructure is plentiful in these parts. The line in question here was the Heanor branch of the Great Northern Railway. It ran to Heanor Gate near Smalley, and it had numerous sidings and yards that served Shipley's pits. Before rail though came water, and as we head into Shipley Country Park, it's not long before water features come into view. This is Osborne's Pond, one of several man-made lakes in Shipley. They fed the Nutbrook Canal, once a vital transport link for the mines, as it connected them to the network of navigable waterways in the East Midlands. Osborne's Pond is now used mainly for fishing. It sits at the foot of the country park, created in the 1970s by Derbyshire County Council as a memorial to mining in the area. 2 years were spent developing what was a series of old spoil heaps and former colliery land into a facility for the public. The park would open in May 1976. Not all of the countryside you can see here is former colliery workings. Some of it is parkland that long predated the heavy industry. It belonged to Shipley Hall. As you climb to the top of Shipley Hill, you're greeted with some of the hall's ancillary buildings. To get to the hall, we have to pass through some woodland. The land upon which the Shipley estate stands was originally an extensive forest, and it was used for hunting. Some of that ancient woodland is still here, and Shipley Hall is hidden away behind this blanket of trees. This is the footprint of Shipley Hall, and it's all that's left these days. Originally built in 1700, this became the home of the Miller-Mundy family in 1734 when the estate came into their possession. The Miller-Mundys would take ownership of the mines, and for the next 250 years, coal mining in some form or other was to be the chief economic activity of the estate under their stewardship. The hall, a grand mansion, was rebuilt in 1799, and the footprint you see here today is that of the later building. It was demolished in 1943. The reason for its demolition was quite simple. Whilst the estate had been in the Miller-Mundy's possession, the family had ordered that coal should not be extracted from under the hall, its grounds, or Shipley Hill. However, there was a rich seam under those landmarks. In 1920, the Miller-Mundys distanced themselves from the estate, signing it over to the Shipley Colliery Company. They then decided to mine the seam, but the result was extensive damage to the hall and excessive subsidence. The National Coal Board later deemed it unsafe and opted to pull it down. After walking through the site of the hall, the path we've been following starts to dip sharply downhill, and it eventually brings you to another lake. This area is known as Shipley Lakeside, which doesn't look particularly appealing. This was a mine site. Shipley had 3 deep mines, namely Shipley, Shipley Woodside and Coppice. It was a massive operation. In total, the pits had upwards of 30 mine shafts. After deep mining ceased, open cast workings took over in the 1950s and 1960s. Open cast mining is responsible for many of Shipley's features today. Soon this area will look a bit different. New builds are starting to be constructed along the edge of Shipley Lake. This landscape is constantly changing. Where we are here is part of that change. We're on part of the Nutbrook Trail, which follows the route of the Canals' former towpath for some 10 miles. It's mad to think that less than 60 years ago, this now peaceful part of Derbyshire was still heavily industrialised. The canal, the railways and the pits have all disappeared, sure, but the legacy they leave behind is one of great national importance. Now, in all likelihood, if you walk this very route, you'll have passed something that you wouldn't even realise was there, and that's Shipley Cricket Club, which is over in that sort of direction. Not quite sure how you get to it, to be honest with you. There is a track on the map, but I never saw it, so yeah, there is a cricket club here in Shipley. Now, we're not too far away from the end here. Now, if you look where I am, you'll see there's the field where we began. The little green with the sign is just beyond this van here, and the house overlooking the green is there too. So we've almost finished this circuit around Shipley Country Park, but of course this is nowhere near as much as Shipley had. You see, over there where all those new build houses are, there's a memorial to the colliery that once stood here. We're going to drive down to that, and then we're going to drive through the rest of the village, the modern Shipley, if you like, along the main road into Heanor. The mining history here can be traced back to the 16th century, when it first began to provide an income to the owners of the Shipley estate. By the early 18th century, mining was an important activity on the estate, but it wasn't until the Miller-Mundys took ownership of the pits in 1765 that things really started to take off. When the Nutbrook Canal was added in 1796, the increased income it brought meant huge expansion and development, including the rebuilding of the hall in 1799. In the late 19th century, under Captain Alfred Edward Miller-Mundy, the collieries were thriving and prosperous, something only amplified by the existence of the railways. Further developments included the building of a model dairy and farm and a water tower to feed it. The hall would also double in size, and the cricket ground was added in 1899. At that time, Shipley was sending over 90,000 tonnes annually by rail to be sold on the London Coal Exchange. By 1959, Woodside alone produced 1 million tonnes of coal. There's no coal being mined today though. Here we have the headstocks of the former Woodside Colliery, arguably the largest and most important of the 3 deep mines. After hitting the 1 million tonnes mark in 1959, deep mining started to decline. Woodside was merged with Coppice, and together the last coal was extracted from them in 1966. The headstocks might look abandoned, but they do have an important modern function. They're now used as a pumping station, vital to the drainage of the Nottinghamshire coalfield. Mining was a difficult and hazardous occupation. The men employed were both poorly paid and exploited by the truck system, a payment of wages in the form of vouchers that could only be used in certain shops. They were working on average a 9 or 10-hour day. In 1881, 1,000 miners employed by the Miller-Mundys came out on strike in an unsuccessful attempt to resist an increase in working hours. Very few workings from the days of deep mining now remain. They're fading away under a blanket of new developments. Now, the redevelopment of this old industrial land is nothing new because it's happened before. Before all these houses existed, there used to be a theme park here called the American Adventure, and that is going to form today's special section. The American Adventure theme park once stood on the site of Woodside Colliery. It was hands down one of the biggest tourist attractions in Derbyshire for at least 2 decades. It opened in 1987, 2 years after a short-lived predecessor called Britannia Park was initially built on the site. The park was based around the Wild West theme at first, before later expanding into other aspects of American history and culture. It was famous for quite a few rides, including the Missile, Runaway Train and Sky Coaster. There was also Nightmare Niagara, a log flume that had 3 drops, one of the tallest of its kind in the UK. Slowly though, the park began to decline during the late 1990s and early 2000s. The old main entrance was forced to close due to subsidence, and the new entrance was considered much less attractive. 2006 would be the final year of the theme park's operation. There has been a petition in recent years to bring it back, but now with the new homes under construction, this is now nothing more than a distant pipe dream. So to finish with, we're driving along the A6007 between Ilkeston and Heanor, taking in the rest of Shipley. This is the part of the village which many would consider to be the main bit, but as we've seen, that's really not the case. It's a typical ribbon development, one long street with houses on either side. While some of the oldest ones belong to the Shipley estate, mostly these properties are much newer, having been built in the early to mid 20th century. You might be asking yourself, given Shipley's success, why it doesn't appear to have developed in the same way as other mining settlements did. There's no terraced rows or model village, for example. Now that's because of the landscape. Shipley siting on a hill would have made any huge development impractical, and so to compensate, housing was constructed elsewhere. The biggest area built for mining purposes around here is at Cotmanhay, just over the border into Ilkeston. The Marlpool estate on the southern edge of Heanor was also erected for mine workers and their families after the Second World War, mainly those at Coppice Colliery. You may have noticed too that Shipley has no church, and that's why. Christ Church at Cotmanhay was the building everyone used. However, that no longer stands now, as a dwindling congregation could not support the upkeep of the large Victorian building it once was. It was demolished in 1987. Shipley's landmarks are few and far between on this road, but there is a garden centre and a garage too. Our final job though is to check out a pub. This is just over the border into Heanor, but the Mundy Arms is relevant to Shipley because of its name. It's a Hungry Horse pub and restaurant and the last of the public houses along the road out of Heanor. That's been Shipley. Keep coal mining in mind though, because the next few episodes will all feature it too, as we dig a bit deeper into the Amber Valley countryside. See you later. Thanks for watching this video, folks. Don't forget to like this episode if you haven't already. It really makes a difference with YouTube. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us a share too if you've got friends who'd like it. You can find all the links to my social media accounts below, as well as my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can donate to the channel. Also, if you've enjoyed this episode, have a look at some more videos in this series. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.